The Wi-Fi Went Out by Unbreakable Vibes TV. It was a Saturday morning like any other in the city. The sun had just begun to rise, casting golden streaks over high-rise apartments and tree-lined avenues. The city was waking up, not to the sounds of birds or the rustling of leaves, but to the soft glow of screens. Phones buzzed, laptops clicked open, and tablets blinked to life. Across the neighborhoods, people connected to the same invisible force that tethered their lives together: Wi-Fi. In an apartment complex filled with young professionals, retirees, students, and remote workers, life moved to the rhythm of the internet. Teenagers tuned into online classes, freelancers rushed to meet international deadlines, parents streamed weekend shows, and toddlers watched cartoons on tablets. The internet wasn't just a luxury anymore, it was oxygen. And then, without warning, it disappeared. One by one, screens froze. Video calls cut off mid-sentence. YouTube videos stopped loading. Phones displayed the dreaded phrase, "no internet connection." At first, the silence was subtle. People stared at their devices, frowning, tapping, restarting routers. It felt like a personal glitch, an isolated incident. But within minutes, the realization spread like wildfire. This wasn't just one household. It was the entire building. Maybe the whole neighborhood. Frustration began to mount. A graphic designer, moments away from submitting a project to a client in Europe, stared at the blinking cursor on his screen in disbelief. A student preparing for crucial exams banged her router in desperation, her online tutor frozen mid-word. A mother attempting to play music while cooking breakfast stood in confusion as her smart speaker failed to respond. All over the building, people emerged from their apartments, routers and phones in hand, wearing the same expression of disbelief. Residents started gathering outside, drawn by a shared crisis. In this community where neighbors barely spoke unless necessary, the lack of internet had triggered an unexpected social response. People looked around, searching for answers, for someone to blame, for a miracle solution. There were rumors, maybe a power surge? A broken cable? A cyber attack? People speculated with the same intensity they reserved for politics or sports. An awkward silence settled over the group. Without their digital lifelines, they didn't know what to do with themselves. The teenagers stood by the staircase, refreshing their screens in vain. The adults murmured about missed deadlines and ruined weekend plans. One man complained about missing an online church service. Another panicked about a virtual job interview. All their lives, so digitized, so interwoven with connectivity, had suddenly been paused. Then, something curious happened. A group of children, denied their daily cartoons and phone games, drifted toward the playground. At first, they kicked dust, bored and agitated. But within minutes, they began playing the old-fashioned way. A makeshift soccer game emerged. Someone found a skipping rope. Laughter started to fill the air. The adults noticed. With nowhere to rush off to and no screens to return to, some of the neighbors remained outside. Conversations sparked slowly. At first, it was simple venting. "Can you believe this? I was in the middle of something." But gradually, the tone shifted. People introduced themselves properly for the first time. They shared their professions, their routines, even their frustrations about how much they had come to rely on technology. An elderly man, who had barely been acknowledged before, began telling stories from decades ago, how they used to live without television, without even phones, and how people knew their neighbors by name. The children gathered around him as he animatedly described a world where playtime didn't require a charger, and communication didn't involve typing. Meanwhile, a mother who had recently moved into the building offered to teach a small group how to make traditional snacks. Soon, there was the smell of fried dough in the air and laughter as people tried, and often failed, to follow her instructions. A few others brought out chairs, forming a loose circle on the open ground between the blocks. Someone switched on an old battery-powered radio. Music floated out, low and nostalgic. It wasn't a party. It wasn't planned. But somehow, it felt special, like the start of something meaningful. By midday, the apartment complex had been transformed. People who had lived inches from one another but never spoken now shared jokes and food. The playground echoed with the energy of real play. Conversations weren't competing with buzzing notifications. There were no selfies, no hashtags, no filters. Just the raw, unfiltered company of others. And all of it had begun with the absence of Wi-Fi. Unseen by all this, far away in a downtown office, engineers at the internet service provider were in panic mode. A critical switch had failed, taking out service to thousands. Customer care lines were jammed. Social media, when accessed via mobile data, was full of outrage. Memes were flying. Theories about sabotage, government censorship, or even alien invasions trended briefly. Back in the estate, however, the lack of Wi-Fi was becoming less of a crisis and more of a revelation. By evening, someone had lit a few candles near the community seating area. People sat in the soft glow, sharing personal stories. A young man talked about how lonely remote work had made him. A teenage girl confessed how overwhelming social media made her feel, even though she was always online. A middle-aged father admitted that, until today, he hadn't realized how little he knew about his neighbors or even about what his kids did all day on their phones. There was something liberating about this forced disconnection. It had cleared the air of distractions, opened space for reflection and genuine interaction. People laughed more. They listened more. Some even said things they hadn't been able to say in years. And then, in the dead of night, the internet returned. At 3:12 a.m., routers blinked back to life. Phones buzzed with notifications. Emails, messages, updates, alerts, they all flooded in. The world was back online. By morning, everything had returned to normal. The apartment complex, once again, fell into silence, not the peaceful silence of community, but the isolated silence of digital immersion. Heads bent over screens. Doors closed. Children returned to tablets. Parents disappeared behind laptop screens. Neighbors went back to nodding silently in the hallway, if that. The magic of the previous day seemed to vanish with the sunrise. But not entirely. That evening, a poster appeared on the community notice board. Hand-drawn but brightly colored, it read, "Community gathering, every Saturday at 4 p.m. Let's unplug together." Surprisingly, people showed up. Not all of them, and not right away. But some came back to the place where something rare had happened. They brought food, games, and chairs. Children brought skipping ropes. Parents brought stories. Elderly residents brought songs from their youth. Something had shifted. The Wi-Fi outage had exposed a truth most had forgotten, that behind the usernames and profiles were real people, living side by side, sharing the same space but not truly seeing each other. It reminded them that while digital tools are powerful, they are no substitute for human connection. People began to value the slow moments. The quiet, screen-free conversations. The touch of a handshake. The warmth of shared food. The comfort of laughter that didn't come from a comedy video, but from someone sitting right next to you. The outage had been brief. But its impact lingered. The girl who once spent hours on social media started writing stories by hand, inspired by the people around her. The freelancer who once worked in isolation now held mini workshops for young aspiring designers in the estate. Children created weekend clubs where no devices were allowed. Every Saturday, the apartment courtyard became a place of joy again. People cooked together, danced together, and most importantly, spoke to one another. New friendships blossomed. Old grudges dissolved. The community became, well, a community again. And so, while the Wi-Fi came back and with it the endless scrolling, streaming, and status updates, something even more valuable had been restored, a sense of shared life. The lesson remained unspoken but deeply felt. Sometimes, it takes a blackout to notice the light. Sometimes, the most meaningful connections aren't the ones made over the internet, but the ones made over shared silence, laughter, and the courage to step outside and say hello.